And so that is heartening to me because I do think a lot more people are interested in supporting producers in a way that goes beyond just like what does it taste in the cup. And also that the consumers are really interested in that stuff. Whereas I think a lot of
Mm,
specialty industry had maybe thought that like your consumer doesn't care, or the easiest way to get to your consumer maybe is to sell them the best cup of coffee, quote unquote. Um, so I think that like now I see a kind of split. I think that there's a real like doubling down in a lot of corners of like, oh, the quality needs to just go up because there's more competition, so I need to have more and more quality. And that's one side, which is kind of like doubling down on the elitist exclusive side of it, which like may or may not work, but I think is fundamentally not scalable. And then there's this whole other cohort of people that are coming in. They're like, look, I just really like coffee. I want to work for myself. I want to do something that's good. And so, like, I'm excited about what coffee can do for me in that regard. Um, in the background of all this, of course, which is the thing that is the sort of boogeyman, is the consolidation of wealth and power. And that's what scares me the most.
Have you been thinking about starting a coffee side hustle? Our brand new Start a Coffee Side Hustle Mastermind Group is launching this August. A 3-month online program designed for new or upcoming coffee business owners anywhere in the world. You'll define your business fundamentals, shape your business blueprint, and learn how to navigate the coffee industry in 2025 small scale, including how to use tools like ChatGPT for smarter planning. It's a grounded, guided way to get started with the support of people who have done it many, many times before. Apply now at mapitforward.coffee/group coaching. Check the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a brand new 5-part series with Brendan Adams from Semilla Coffee in Canada. Brendan, welcome to the podcast for the first time.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
The pleasure is mine, sir. I was kind of a stalker on Instagram of your account. I, on behalf of the coffee industry, want to thank you for the effort that you put in through Instagram to inform us and educate us. Folks, a lot of you don't realize how thankless that work is. And it takes an extraordinary amount of effort to do that, and usually for not a lot in return. So, Brendan, I really appreciate that. I hope that more and more people recognize what you do. And through this conversation, I hope that we get people to understand that what you're doing comes from such a genuine, authentic place, that you're the kind of business that more people really need to start looking at, wondering like, how do I support this business? How do I get involved with the responsible purchasing of coffee? And we're going to explore all of that through this series. This series title, folks, is Can We Actually Make Coffee Better? You should expect many opinions through this series. Brendan and I both have a lot to say about this. And in this episode, we're talking specifically about specialty coffee then and now. And I guess when we say then and now, what we're talking about is like at the beginning of when specialty coffee, especially in the beginning of our careers, let's say at the beginning of the early 2000s, what was the hope for specialty coffee and where is it now? Have we arrived at the place where we want it to be? And I also want to mention that we have people coming on the podcast that were a part of establishing that whole vision. So stay tuned for that as well. Brendan, so that we can have a good kind of foundation for the perspective that you come from, tell people about you and Semilla Coffee.
Sure. Sounds good. First, thank you so much for your kind words, and of course for the
You're
invitation.
welcome.
It's really appreciated. And of course, I really want to give credit where it's due within our team. I think that when I started Semilla, it was myself alone who did a lot of content on Instagram and social media on the website. And as the business grew, it became pretty obvious that we wanted to invest more in that sort of messaging, but also increase the quality of it. And so we owe a lot of probably the stuff that you saw in quality of editing and the aesthetic style and everything to Arvid, who is our social media manager and general overall creative guy. And so big shout out to Arvid because he's been
Shout
incredible
out
and
to
been helping
Arvid.
us a lot.
The quality is
Um,
exceptional.
yeah, he's done a really, really great job, and I think
Mm.
that's really like a super key part of it, right? Is we want to make sure that the messaging is there, but also that it's compelling and that people are want to listen to it, and it's not just some wall of text, someone lecturing you or something.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
so regarding Semilla, I guess I founded Semilla in 2019. This came after several years of working within the coffee industry in specialty coffee. Primarily worked as began, as many people do, as just a barista, knowing nothing, and sort of just through time and interest, found my way through a variety of different roles, whether that was doing sales, account management on the wholesale side, or then I eventually got into roasting and then green buying as well. And then through that process, I guess when I started to do the green buying, I started to realize that there was a lot of holes and gaps in what I thought we were trying to do. And I think this ties to our question of like, what is specialty coffee and what was
Mm.
it then versus now? I think that when Semilla was founded, there was really a premise for me of like, how do we get back to those original principles that I believe specialty coffee was about, that interested me about specialty coffee. So it's Semilla's main foundation now and has been since the beginning about primarily building access. And I think this is a very generic thing to say. Many people can say build access if you haven't sold coffee on a market, for example, but you're a wealthy, empowered producer, you could say they have no access. When we talk about building access, we talk about it from the frame of a world systems analysis perspective, which is looking at supply chains from a peripheral and a core perspective, in which coffee is fundamentally still very prone to that, right? You have somebody who has the raw material, the coffee cherry, on the most peripheral part, and they end up with the least aggregated value. And then you end up with the core, which is the roasters and everyone else who is getting the most aggregated value. And
Mm.
so specialty coffee for me has been how do we use this as a tool with Semilla to connect with and platform those most peripheral people who have an interest to move closer to that core or central place in the supply
Right.
chain in such a way that leads to a more aggregated value, not only in terms of cost and price, but in terms of like their understanding and agency within that supply chain. So connecting with marginalized peripheral smallholders was key for Semilla. But then beyond that, also understanding that we can't just pick one smallholder that produces an 88-point geisha and celebrate ourselves. We need to do this on a community level. And so it's been not only just marginalized peripheral smallholders, but their communities. And our commitment to those communities is to buy all of the coffee as much as we can that they'll get forward to us at any level of quality aside from outright defective coffee, and to connect it to roasters around the world in a long-term relational way. So those are sort of like our three general pillars, I would say: peripheral, smallholders without access, uh, community-wide commitment year over year, and fundamentally also working towards that long-term relational side with the roasters where they feel a need and commitment to continue with the same producers year over year.
So, if I understand it correctly, you guys are looking at building relationships so that you can shorten the number of people that are in the supply chain and
Exactly.
strengthening those relationships so that people have more direct insight towards each other. Am I understanding
Yeah.
that correctly?
100%. I think that like there's still a massive amount of telephone tag, if you want to call it, within especially coffee
Right.
system, where you get your info document that you get from an importer, and it might have some really basic information, volcanic soil or X altitude or this variety or 100 producers. But this is clearly not a sufficient level of understanding to really tackle the complexity that is coffee production and relational buying, right? And so I think that that's a really key part for us is that if we can be working really closely with the smallholder groups that we work with year over year and knowing them super well, and then really closely working with our roaster partners and developing really strong relationships with them as well, it becomes that much easier for us to transmit real, authentic information that has actual benefit and value to people that isn't just, I need to have a photo and an altitude and a tasting note to sell this coffee, right?
Yeah. It 20 20 plus years in this industry, and it still blows my mind how much I don't know. And I spend a lot of time researching the coffee supply
Mm-hmm.
chain and all the peripheral industries that are involved in it. I consume a disgusting amount of content all day, every day, and I still don't feel like I know 10% of what's going on.
Yeah,
And
100%.
it's wild, right? Like, this is such a complex and complicated web of a supply chain. People could be forgiven for not understanding the total intricacies of it, but we are entering a very interesting time where decisions, unintended consequences, or even intended consequences of things that aren't even related to our industry, and now forcing people to have to make decisions that they didn't want. And I guess that leads directly into this idea of like specialty coffee then and now. And the reason I
Mhm.
say that is because, you know, we put out a report today. We're recording this on the 29th of July. And every week, Map It Forward puts out a report, you know, this week in Map It Forward. And we talk about something that's relevant in the industry. Kind of, it's not extensive. It's just a bite of something so that people can have something to think about. And what that is this week is about the 50% tariffs that the
Mhm.
US is putting on Brazil, and the consequences of those tariffs, not just on the United States, not just on Brazil, but on a global level. So if we've
Yeah.
released that report for the Middle East as well. And you might think that well, what the hell could, you know, Brazil having to pay, having 50% tariffs put on them, and importers in the United States having to pay those tariffs. Well, how could that impact the Middle East? There's huge impacts for the Middle East, especially when you partner that with what's going on with EUDR. So
Mhm.
before we address all of that, let's go to then, back then, as we're
Mhm.
saying, you know, then
Sure.
and now. What was the promise or the hope of specialty coffee when it was first established?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think this is one of those things for me where like I think there's sort of like a lore, and especially coffee, that we all kind of learn as we're going through it. And then you
Right,
you sort of take it as like a face value, like this is the truth. And then you realize, like to your comment about content and understanding things, I started like a really good example is the 80-point level for specialty coffee. This is like something we all say, and I've heard on your podcast and heard from other
yeah,
people, and it's definitely a standard that we all sort of say, but I don't know if there's anywhere really written down that says like specialty coffee is 80 plus point coffee. You know what I'm saying? It's so we have these
right,
sort of standards within specialty coffee basically that are like these are this is how it works or how we think it works. But it seems like it's really sort of like this oral history almost that we've picked up from little brands that like have formed the basis of our understanding. And so I say all that in the sense of saying that what I think specialty coffee was then versus now does come from some academic research. There's a really good paper on firm-led sustainability that looked into this stuff in like 2016, 2017 about the promises of specialty coffee, which I think forms a lot of the basis of what I think of about it. But also a lot of it comes from just like being in the industry and hearing the sort of like, this is what specialty coffee is when you're trying to convince someone to not buy fair trade coffee or to pay the extra money for your bag when they usually buy
mm,
at a grocery store or something, right? And so for me, I think that then specialty coffee was most simply a premise in which, via increased coffee quality, we could create more justice for specifically smallholder coffee growers in the global south. I think that's sort of
mm,
like the broad premise of it. And then attached to that was this notion that it would be done via long-term relationships and and transparency and traceability that would therefore guarantee some level of justice that could be verified, right? Um, Along the way, I think that what's sort of happened, if I can jump ahead a little bit already, is just sort
go
of like
ahead.
right away how this fractured movement was, as we would call firm-led sustainability, individual businesses that were making their sort of sustainability claims and markers. These things were co-opted along the way and taken on by different brands, just as is inherent to the nature of the growth of an industry. People started sort of copycatting one another, doing their own version of it. And we get like sort of a hodgepodge version of what all that is now that fundamentally sort of just boils down to like I said before, photo of a farmer, name of a farm, FOB price, and if you're lucky, and some tasting notes and a tiny little history, right? That's sort of what
Mm,
specialty coffee has sort of been distilled into. I think the thing with specialty coffee then that is really interesting is the notion of like the dearth of access to coffee. So a lot of those people who are doing those founding firms, I think, would probably agree that if you wanted good coffee and you wanted to know where it came from, you were going to have to get on a plane and figure out where to get that coffee from. Whether that meant you went and
Right.
talked to a cooperative or whatever, you weren't going to be able to call an importer and say, hey, I need 200 bags of this quality coffee, give me 30 microlots and 170 bags of blend, and I need to make sure 10 is from a woman producer and 10 is from an indigenous producer. Like the way in which the specialty coffee ecosystem has evolved is really like a testament to capitalist adaptation, right? Like it's found
Mm.
a way in which 25 years ago, 20 years ago was just like, forget about it. You were going to get wash miles in a full container load from Brazil or from Colombia, but you weren't going to get um, that what the level of what you can just get by calling like an importer now and being like, hey, could I place an order for this really specific coffee from
Mhm.
this one grower 8 months in advance? And so there's some benefits to that, but there's also some massive drawbacks, I think. So I think that would be without going too deep into now. That's sort of where I view then as being, yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that I have learnt over the 20 years, and I don't think I've become aware of it until this conversation, is that specialty coffee as a definition has so many layers, and as a movement, right,
Mm,
has so many layers that it's almost like choose your own adventure, right?
yeah.
You can turn around and say, we only buy specialty grade coffee. And okay, what do you mean by specialty grade coffee? 80 points and above. Okay. What else about specialty coffee do you care about? Well, that's how we define our business model. All right, well, that's one point.
Hmm.
But then how deep into the supply chain are you getting? How much are you taking care of the of coffee as a craft? How much do you care about the communication with your staff and with your customers? How aware are
Hmm.
you of the way that was sourced, and how aware are you of how it was grown, and how aware are you of the pricing models that are used to source that coffee? Do you know if it's going to be available in 5, 10, 20, 25 years? Do you know if the all of those different layers really do help us understand, I guess, depending on when you join specialty coffee, like how people are defining it. And as you're saying, it's a law, right? Like if you look at someone like
Hmm.
George Howe or like Mark Dundon, these are the OGs that were involved in building supply chains
Yeah.
and participating in shaping Cup of Excellence
Hmm.
and things like that. I look at those kind of folks, and they've both recently been on the podcast, and
Yeah.
they both are excited about what's coming. They're equally as terrified about what's coming.
Hmm. Yeah.
How do
For sure.
you feel about the now with
Hmm.
regards to that?
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting moment for specialty, and it has been for a few years. I would say, like, since the pandemic, which is basically when we started, I think there's been a lot of growth, obviously, like a massive amount of growth, especially like in a market like Canada or like other markets like you're
Mhm.
mentioning, that are outside of America. Like I think for forever, especially coffee was the United States and like Northern Europe, and now like seeing the growth in Southern Europe, seeing the growth in Canada, seeing the growth in the Middle East, seeing the growth in China, these things make a whole new dynamic that's like I don't even know if I have a comment on so many of those markets because it's so distinct
Right.
and diverse. But I do think that like what we're seeing is like a sort of democratization within specialty coffee now, where like a lot of that thing that people were interested in before in this in quality, in coffee quality and specialty was quality first, sustainability, good impact second was how I would define it, and so it was really like
Right.
what you went out there and looked for was like find the best thing on the table, and then hopefully afterwards there would come some nice story that you could patch in and sell. And if not, the coffee should sell itself because it's good enough. And you still do have firms that do that, like companies that do that, I think. But I think that more and more what I see is like this sort of like hybridization of what I would argue is something like a fair trade type consumerist consciousness,
Mm.
that may or may not believe in fair trade, quote unquote, the system, but believes in the principles, right? And they want to run a business that, like, fundamentally, yes, they like good coffee, but they don't also have that frame of understanding. Maybe they're not like trained in that way, or maybe they just don't really care that much. What really appeals to them is like I would say, like, maybe they don't view it in that exact language, but what I would call like the liberatory potential of specialty coffee. That like through this thing that you could create your life business around, you could do something really good with it and you could cause a really good downstream impact. And so that is heartening to me because I do think a lot more people are interested in supporting producers in a way that goes beyond just like what does it taste in the cup. And also that the consumers are really interested in that stuff. Whereas I think a lot of
Mm.
specialty industry had maybe thought that like your consumer doesn't care, or the easiest way to get to your consumer maybe is to sell them the best cup of coffee, quote unquote. Um, so I think that like now I see a kind of split. I think that there's a real like doubling down in a lot of corners of like, oh, the quality needs to just go up because there's more competition, so I need to have more and more quality. And that's one side, which is kind of like doubling down on the elitist exclusive side of it, which like may or may not work, but I think is fundamentally not scalable. And then there's this whole other cohort of people that are coming and they're like, look, I just really like coffee. I want to work for myself. I want to do something that's good. And so like I'm excited about what coffee can do for me in that regard. Um, in the background of all this, of course, which is the thing that is the sort of boogeyman, is the consolidation of wealth and power. And that's what scares me the most. I don't worry about
Right.
the individual actors in specialty. It's like what's happening on origin and on consuming side in terms of how every day you can just kind of feel the walls closing in, where like
Hmm.
a growing popularity is increasing the attention from the financial sector, increasing investor interest, increasing all of these different people who have very little concern for any of that fundamental thing that we could say in the then, which was passion. You could say that you could unite all of these people with specialty coffee under passion. You were doing something that was like fundamentally you were a barista or you were interested in coffee or there was a small selected group of people who were like, I'm going to start this crazy business in 2006 and try to like source coffee in a really hard climate and like put traceability when no one does that. Like that took a lot of guts and passion for people like George Howell or even, Jeff Watts at Intelligentsia. Any of these people who
Hmm.
started these things, that was pretty crazy. And we have a lot of credit to give to those people for blazing that path in that regard and making that noise. Um,
100%.
now that these have become investment vehicles, and we can people see big money, whether it's the C market being inflated by hedge fund investors this year, or it's like the consolidation of like export side operations where like more and more exporters are just owned by same multinationals, or the same thing with the roasting companies being bought out. That's what scares me a little bit because the thing that worries me the most is that the coffee industry that I love and care about, that it may not continue to survive unless we are like really diligently defining why we care about that and why that's important. And I think that's been a big part of Semilla is like, what are we defining as like what we believe as um, the coffee industry worth fighting for, I guess, and I view that really on like
Mm.
the specialty side, like on the supply side, sorry. But I think also to a certain extent on the consuming and production side as well, right?
I couldn't agree more. And that's why, the thing that we've been talking about so much on this podcast, like people need to stop with the entitlement that, don't worry, we've got ages this to fix this
Mm-hmm.
industry. We don't have ages to
Yeah.
fix this industry, folks. There is no
Yeah.
guarantee, in my opinion, that specialty coffee, we don't have a right to specialty coffee. We have to create the privilege of being able to be in this industry. And we are going to dedicate in this series a whole episode to that discussion. In the next episode, we're talking about quality, though. So join us for the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.